Perfect. Okay, great. Let's get started. So, hello, welcome to the second community roundtable for the Forestry Adaptation Practitioners Network. This event is made possible with funding through the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers Climate Change Task Force. My name is Suzanne Sealing. I am the community manager for the FAPN. I'm a project manager at the Climate Risk Institute, and I will be the moderator for today's event. So if at any time you run into technical issues or you have questions about using Zoom features, please open the chat box, locate my name, and you can send me a private message. Please note that your microphones have been automatically muted to avoid audio distractions, but you are able to unmute it, and there'll be a number of opportunities for you to let your voice be heard throughout this time. And if you have any questions that you want to just post in the chat box along the way, you're also very welcome to do that. So we have an exciting lineup of agenda items today. We will first we're going to provide a brief overview of the FAPN. There are some new faces to today's event. We'll keep it short. And then we have Ben Paquette-Struger from the University of Victoria. He is here to share information on how he developed localized climate projections to help a timberlands management company understand how a changing climate will impact their forestry operations, and also how they used it to develop adaptation strategies to build resilience into their company's operations. We will then hear from an FAPN member who will provide an overview of their forestry and climate change related project. You'll also have an opportunity to ask them questions. If you've shown up today and you've decided, oh, you know what, maybe I would like to share something that I'm working on, please, we would love to hear from you. I also missed in there number 3, we're going to do a fun meet and greet so we can get to know each other. And then last, we'll wrap up and tell you how you can access resources, including the slides for this event and the recording. So the Forestry Adaptation Practitioners Network. This was formerly the Forestry Adaptation Community of Practice, or the FACOP. This was launched in 2012. And this was, it was a priority that was identified by the Canadian Forest Ministers as needing a community of practice for practitioners in this sector to get together, to share ideas, share best practices, and really advance their work. And in 2022, we decided to redevelop the platform. The former one had sort of lost its jazz and it really needed a facelift. So we relaunched it using EarthNet software, and that's what today is known as the Forestry Adaptation Practitioners Network. And the purpose is it's an online peer learning network. And sometimes you might more commonly know this as a community practice or a social network, even professional network. And the purpose is to bring people together who have a common interest, right? So for us, that's forestry. And when they get together, these people online, they share information, resources, provide mutual support. And this is all with the aim that it helps to improve and advance their practice. And we really strive to offer a variety of options for you to participate in the network, to share your expertise and lessons learned with other practitioners. The online platform has a number of features associated with it, and there are different ways you can post different forms. You can post about an action. You can ask for help, an event. You could even poll or survey the rest of the FAPN membership. And we do have a nice range of members geographically. So some international folks, and then of course, across Canada. And like we're sitting at today, we offer activities. So we plan and host webinars, community roundtables. We send out bi-weekly email roundups, which is to keep you updated on all the recent activity in the network. We also plan expert panel discussions, and we would love to hear from you on any other things that you're interested in seeing, any other formats, and so forth. Okay, are there any questions related to that? I should have showed you how to perhaps raise your hand. If you know how to use the raise your hand function, then we can turn to you. Okay. All right. Well, now we're going to get into a meet and greet. So let's get to know each other. We'd like to know your name, where you're located, who you work for, and also what is your favorite forest related idea or fact that you like to tell others about. So who would like to start us off? If you raise your hand, I can go to your name and unmute you. Okay, David, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for hosting this. My name's Dave Atkinson. I'm here in Victoria, BC. I work for University of Victoria. I work with Ben at UVic. My favorite forest-related idea, probably that my daughter's a firefighter for the province, a wildland firefighter. So
Wow, super.
thanks.
It's a tough season last year, and I imagine
Yeah.
this year too.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, who would like to go next? Okay. Lee, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Oh, my camera's working. Okay, sure. I will go next and I'll follow in Dave's introduction there. So my name's Lee Woodham. I'm the Director of Forest Health and Adaptation for the Government of Alberta, based out of Edmonton. And let me see my fact. Similar to Dave, I have created a future forester. I also have a son that's graduating from forestry. So I've done my part for future forests in that regards. Thanks.
Amazing. That's great. Okay. Okay, Letitia?
Yeah, hi, my name's Letitia.
Letitia.
It's good to meet you.
Me too.
So yeah, I'm Letitia McDonald. I'm located in Peace River. I'm the Forest Health Officer for the Peace River and High Level Forest areas. My favorite forest-related idea is that insects do show love to each other and have affection. We can have a conversation on that if you'd like.
Super. Okay, Allison?
Hi, my name's Allison. I'm also in the province of Alberta, Forest Health Officer located in Whitefort. And a cool forestry fact is that the trees can communicate through their mycorrhizal networks and send distress signals and heat and just that they communicate with each other is cool.
I did recently, not recently, a while ago, I read a book. I can't remember what it's called, but it reminded me of that they even will share water for each other. If one is experiencing maybe a little bit more dryness, they'll help to share it through their root system. Very cool. Good one. Okay, who's next? Okay, Devin, go ahead.
Hi. I also work for the province of Alberta in the Forest Health and Adaptation section. I work in Whitecourt, and yeah, I don't know what my favorite forest-related idea would be. Um, just interested, I guess, in forest pests and how they're going to respond to our future climate.
Great. Thank you. Great to have you. Anybody like to go next? For Ingrid, excellent. Go ahead, Ingrid. Are you able to unmute, Ingrid? Oh, there we go.
Okay, strange things happening. Apologize for that. I don't know what you heard so far.
Nothing.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So I'm in the East Kootenay in the traditional unceded territories of the Ktunaxa peoples. And full disclosure, I'm a bit of an interloper. I'm not a forester. I'm not a forest practitioner. But I've been working in this region for a very, very long time on climate adaptation and have been getting progressively more involved in heated conversations about climate adaptation with forests locally and in the region. So I'm here to learn.
Excellent. More than welcome.
Thank you.
I think we're getting through pretty well. Anybody else like to? You can also use the chat box too if you'd prefer.
I can go next.
Okay, great, Jennifer.
My name is Jennifer Kosh. I'm also with the government of Alberta. I'm in the compliance and enforcement business, and my favorite forestry topic is just finding better ways to get better practices on the ground, whether it's research, digital data, whatever it is, just to get some better monitoring out there.
Great. I think we've worked through almost everyone. Did we miss anyone? Anyone like to go that we haven't heard from? Okay. Okay, great. Excellent. I'll keep moving on here. So now we are going to turn it over to Ben. So Ben Paquette-Struger is here to talk to us about using climate data and models in forest management. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ben. So Ben is a PhD candidate in the climate laboratory in the geography department at the University of Victoria. His research, teaching, and fieldwork experiences have all centered around investigating important relationships between both weather and climate on crucial resources of fresh water in Western and Northern Canada. His hope is that this work will contribute rigorous science to managing water and environmental resources. He has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Guelph and a Master's from the University of Victoria. He has recently been involved in a multi-year research internship with Mosaic Forest Management and the MyTax program. Previously, he worked in the private sector as a hydrologist and taught several college and university courses, including statistical analysis, geography, hydrology, and climatology. It's well fit to join us today. So with that, I will pass it off to Ben. Ben will share his slides.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay, awesome. Firstly, just a huge thank you to the organizers and to Suzanne for the invitation to speak and for all of the work that you've been putting on behind the scenes. It's much appreciated. So with all that being said, this is a talk called Integrating Climate Projections with Adaptive Strategies to Increase Climate Resilience in Forestry Operations. And two of my colleagues who aren't able to join us today, Molly Hudson and David Belesne, have been huge contributors to this project as well. So a quick outline, I'll explain Mosaic to those of you that might not know much about what the company does, some context around the weather and climate reality of life here on British Columbia's far west coast, you know, why they felt compelled to invest in climate planning to begin with, their approach historically as well as moving forward. I'll get into a bit of the nitty-gritty of the climate modeling that we've done, some very brief overviews of results, and some ways that these results have recently been incorporated into different mitigation and adaptation operational activities. But again, just underscoring that we're still in the early stages of taking in all of the information and data that we've generated through this modeling. And we're now only beginning to see it start to kind of make its way out into some of the activities and decisions that are taking place out on the land base. Then after, we can have some time for discussion and questions if we still have the time. So for anyone unfamiliar with Mosaic, we're a West Coast timberlands management company. The vast majority of production comes from private forested land base. We're Canada's largest private timberland producer, over 2,000 people employed through the operations. We manage a number of public licenses as well. We have been in operation here in British Columbia under different names for over 100 years. We're a privately owned company with the two main investors being different pension funds. Forest management and supply chain is certified under the Sustainable Forestry Initiative for Forest Management, PEFC for chain of custody, and ISO 14001 for environmental management systems. Now, just a little bit of context about why a privately owned timberlands company operating on privately owned land would be invested in climate change planning. Obviously, from a global context, there's an imperative for concerted action on climate, whether it's the Paris Agreement, UN COP sessions, biodiversity conferences, or the IPCC reports consistently calling for nature-based solutions. This is obviously a great fit for forestry in general to hopefully provide some possible solutions. On a national and provincial level, Canada and BC have various plans and targets to support net zero goals by 2050. And finally, from a marketplace perspective, Mosaic's primary forest management certification, SFI, now requires the explicit treatment of climate change and climate change aspects into its standard with the new climate smart forestry objective, of which Mosaic was successfully certified back in early 2022. So this has become an important mandate to maintain certifications that Mosaic deems crucial to their operation. And I won't get too much into this organizational slide, but ultimately there has been for years now, well before I got involved with Mosaic, there have been at a multitude of levels, different initiatives and directives all dedicated towards trying to move the company to being as climate resilient, climate smart, whichever words you want to use, as possible. And again, if these are things that you're interested in knowing any more details on, feel free to contact myself or some of my colleagues after the presentation. And as far as past and ongoing work, again, the past few years have sort of offered Mosaic the opportunity to coalesce work that has been ongoing for a number of years on climate adaptation. And again, these are things that can be discussed in greater detail after the presentation. But when you see all the different things that are going on across the company, I think really I could summarize it by stating that the risks of climate and weather are now elevated to the highest levels of the company. The executive team, the board of directors, and to ownership, everybody is consistently wanting to know what the company is doing to improve their climate resilience, elevating the significance of climate within the overall structure of the company. And with all that being said, that sort of is a good place for me to discuss kind of my entry into all of this, which was originally through a MyTax internship. And again, the internship originally had 4 key objectives, one being the spatial forecasting of operational shutdowns. Obviously, they're a company that can have its operations limited by weather, especially fire weather and wet weather shutdown. There's also a need for me to assist them in supporting advancements to their weather station network, snow sensors, decisions on having portable versus permanent weather stations that can serve more so as climate change reference stations, obviously supporting climate modeling and some other work. Now, one objective that was consistent amongst these initial goals was to better integrate data that the Mosaic weather station network is generating. And again, there's over 40 of these weather stations distributed across Vancouver Island. And when I get into sort of some issues related to the climate that we're dealing with here on Vancouver Island, the necessity for that many stations will become pretty clear. So, generally speaking, watersheds in this coastal region of BC are comprised of complex mountainous topography that experiences considerable seasonality with respect to precipitation. There's interchanging sequences of east-moving low-pressure systems and high-pressure systems that strongly regulate the weather across coastal BC. Again, this is probably details you don't necessarily need to know, but anyways, forming adjacent to the Aleutian Islands in the North Pacific, low-pressure systems are generated and migrate easterly towards British Columbia, especially during the winter months. And therefore, as you can see, Vancouver Island receives frequent inputs of rainfall, mixed rain and snowfall during the winter months due to moist frontal systems regularly moving in from the Pacific Ocean. We also have a transitional snow line on Vancouver Island, with the higher elevations getting considerable snow throughout the wintertime. While the winter months receive considerable precipitation out here on Vancouver Island, July and August generally receive very little precipitation, sometimes inducing elevated droughts of forest fire risks. And as we've mentioned previously, Vancouver Island is truly a mosaic of different weather and climate zones. And so you'll notice these 2 areas, one is Port Renfrew, one is Victoria. You can see their locations down in purple rectangles in that map on the bottom left. They are only separated by about 80 kilometers as far as how the crow flies, but you'll notice that Port Renfrew gets about 3,500 millimeters of precipitation, whereas here in Victoria, we get less than 900 millimeters. So not even 100 kilometers difference in distance. One area gets 4 times the annual precipitation than another. Similarly, Tofino and Nanaimo are located at about the same latitude on Vancouver Island. One happens to be on the west coast, one on the east coast, and Tofino gets about 3 times the rain that Nanaimo gets. So anytime you're looking to plan for climate adaptation, plan for climate mitigation, we knew we needed to get climate projections on as small a spatial resolution as possible, because the work you're going to do in one watershed is not going to be the same as what you're going to need to do in another watershed. And that's just purely because weather changes so much from watershed to watershed here on Vancouver Island. And again, this is ultimately because of some topographical effects. Sort of encapsulating the southern tip of Vancouver Island, we have Washington's Olympic Range Mountains, up to about 2,500 meters above sea level. They intercept a ton of precipitation that would otherwise fall in the Victoria region. Victoria, as a result, is in quite a rain shadow, which is why it has such less precipitation than Port Renfrew and other regions that are right on the west coast that aren't being blocked by the Olympic mountain range. As well, the insular mountains run down sort of the central spine of Vancouver Island. They're not quite as tall as the Olympic mountains, but they'll still induce a bit of a rain shadow, whereby areas on the left or on the west coast of the island receive considerably more precipitation than those on the east, on the inside of the island. And again, just looking at some of Mosaic's weather station data, again, you can really see how important where you happen to be on Vancouver Island is at influencing the weather. The bottom table are purely South Island stations. This was during the big atmospheric river event that hit British Columbia during November of 2021. If you recall, caused massive flooding. Most of BC was basically cut off by road and rail from the rest of Canada. Any of the locations that are in red had over 200 millimeters of rain that fell in that period. Things in yellow had over 100. Up at the top in the Central Island, you'll see there's still watersheds in white, meaning they got under 100 millimeters of rain during that period. And all of the North Island stations, which I didn't even include, got less than 100 millimeters of rain during that period. Again, just showing considerable difference in how much precipitation fell during that big event on an area that isn't overly massive as far as Canada is concerned. So, taking all of that together, what does this mean for the objectives of generating regional climate modeling results for Vancouver Island? Well, it meant that we began this modeling exercise with a couple of goals in mind, the most important of which was doing our best to incorporate the substantial variability that weather and climate exhibits on Vancouver Island spatially. So we want to support the overarching goal of assessing current and future forest operations and their vulnerabilities using the best resources available for coastal BC. We wanted to inform decision-making with respect to mitigation and adaptation opportunities by providing robust climate projections for Mosaic's operational regions. And this was critical for improving the operational ability to estimate, mitigate, and adapt to the cumulative effects of forestry practices and climate change across the watersheds under Mosaic management. We wanted to use readily available climate tools and data to produce custom climate projections, figures, and reports for the 4 different Mosaic operational zones. And a big focus in the production of these projections was to generate them, one, with as small a spatial resolution as possible. And we wanted to operationalize the data in formats that would be relevant to the people working on the land, that would be relevant to shutdown parameters, whether it's wet weather shutdown parameters during the winter season, or fire weather parameters during the drier season. And we wanted to assist with current and future climate-focused certifications and planning. And all of this was to be done in conjunction with a multitude of different climate and weather tools that were already sort of integrated into Mosaic operational planning. For example, these are temperature and precipitation probabilistic forecasts, which project the probabilities that precipitation levels or temperature levels will be below, near, or above normal conditions for various periods into the future. This happens to be one that's 1 to 3 months in advance, but again, you can go up to 10 to 12 months in advance. And some additional weather tools that Mosaic utilized. On the left, we have a provincial tool that broadcasts current wildfire conditions, and on the right is just a more general weather forecast for different areas around Vancouver Island. So making sure that the data that we're going to generate from the climate projections sort of is aligned in a sense with tools they're already comfortable with using and understanding. And so it could be a relatively streamlined incorporation into their operations. And again, all of this work, especially at the beginning, was centered around just making sure that all of the different people you're communicating with and speaking to across the company has a solid baseline understanding of different weather and climate processes. And this also applied to explanations of what exactly climate models are, what downscaling procedures are, why we use certain tools, why we use products and tools from certain research organizations. And again, I won't spend too much time getting lost in the weeds of climate models and downscaling techniques and all that, but ultimately just explaining that global climate models, they generate information on scales that are about 150 to 200 kilometers squared. And as far as making decisions on the ground on Vancouver Island, that is far too coarse a spatial resolution. So we went to an organization that's actually housed here at the University of Victoria called the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. And they have a couple excellent tools. And the one that we ended up using is called the PCIC Climate Explorer. And it takes data at 150 to 200 kilometers squared and downscales it to about 10 kilometers squared. And the coast of Vancouver Island is a very tricky and difficult place to forecast weather for and project climate for. And PCIC happens to be very good at it, and they specialize for this region. So as a result, that's why we went with these tools. And again, important things to explain to the company at large are just things like vulnerabilities in forest operations can come from two sort of main manifestations of climate change. It can change, or it can come from changes in average conditions, as well. It can come from changes in extreme events, which are obviously trickier to study and get information on because they happen so rarely, but we can all understand the disproportionately large societal, infrastructural, economic tolls they can take when they do occur. And this was also the point at which I began to learn a lot myself in just having discussions with different folks from around the company. I think I came in maybe thinking that I would be doing a lot of explaining and teaching to people working on the land around the company, but that really wasn't the case. People were very climate and weather literate, which makes sense since they're working on the land, and very ready to have conversations about how weather and climate changes were already impacting activities that they're responsible for, and already trying to come up with solutions for. And I think contextualizing how changes to average and extreme conditions can manifest themselves with Mosaic operations can be explained pretty well by a trip I took, for example, out to the Mosaic seed orchard. And again, those are some pictures you'll see on the left. Bevan Wigmore is one of the people responsible for this orchard. She invited me out to discuss some of the challenges they're facing out there due to climate warming, due to climate change on day-to-day scales, as well as long-term time scales. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that most, if not all, of the coastal BC seed orchards in Canada are located on the Saanich Peninsula, which is an area near Victoria, because of the warm and comparatively dry climate. It's ideal for inducing cones. Because of that rain shadow I discussed previously, it's actually what we would regard as the only Mediterranean climate here in Canada. Here at the seed orchard, they grow about 90% Douglas fir, a little bit of cedar, and a little bit of white pine. Bevan and her team like to have their seed orchard there. They'd obviously like to run it indefinitely into the future there. But as climate continues to change, their current existential question is, will their location continue to be ideal for coastal seed orchard growth 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the road? And obviously there's a number of things that they can do to adjust and adapt, and they're already doing these things. They can make genetic adjustments. They can plant more trees to keep them smaller to curb the risk of heat and dryness, things like that. But ultimately, there's the larger question of, will conditions at the seed orchard remain ideal for cone growth, or do they need to think about changing locations? Because it takes about 10 to 20 years for a new location to become financially viable. And so these are the types of questions that our climate projection modeling would hope help ideally satisfy, but if not satisfy, at least inform in a way that makes them better prepared to make these decisions. And as if struggling with these questions of existential dread isn't enough for them, they came into work in the middle of that, again, November atmospheric river event in 2021, and found that there'd been a considerable debris flow caused by saturated and waterlogged soils. They had to engineer quite a drainage solution to not only cope with the damage that debris flow had caused, but also plan for future potential hydrologic issues that might come down the proverbial pipe again. So with all that being said, we can sort of hop into the tool that we used for our climate projections. Again, this was the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium Climate Explorer. It's publicly available. It's free. It is ready to use for anybody that is interested. It's a tool for locating, visualizing, and downloading data that describes projected future climate conditions for regions of interest anywhere in the Pacific and Yukon region. You can pick from 29 different climate models that PCIC assists in downscaling down to about 10 kilometers squared. They offer analyzing 3 different emission scenarios, a low, a medium, and a high emission scenario. And there are 4 time periods that you can analyze. Obviously, the 1981 to 2010 baseline period, and then 3 different periods into the future. And I think the most important positive of this tool is that you can define your own custom regions of interest by selecting custom polygon shapes or just incorporating your own shape files into the tool, which really lets you tailor the results and integrate projection information purely into relatively small areas that are of relevance to your company, industry, municipality, regional district, community, etc. So for our own regional projections, we looked at 4 different areas of Vancouver Island: the North Island portion, Central Island, the Southwest, and then the Southeast. And again, breaking our projections up into these smaller areas because of how different weather and climate is across relatively small areas of Vancouver Island. An important aspect of weather forecasting and climate projections is that obviously the farther into the future you're trying to project or forecast, the less certain we are about that data. So as a result, even though we could look at 2070 to 2100 time periods, I just felt like perhaps it's too far in advance to be overly confident about. And as a result, we just compared the 2011 to 2039 and 2040 to 2069 time periods to our baseline period of 1981 to 2010. And my hope is that at some point, the climate tool will be updated with an even more recent baseline climate normal of 1991 to 2020. We used what PCIC regards as the best model available for Western Canada. That's the CAN ESM2 model. I think ideally it would have been nice to use a model ensemble approach where we're looking at a suite of different models and where they agree and where they might not agree to incorporate more probability or confidence intervals into our projections. But perhaps that'll be something that we integrate down the road. We went with a medium climate scenario. Again, that's always up for debate. At the time, there had been some recent publications that suggested that that was a likely pathway that would be reached. It's been a couple of years since we undertook that work. And again, if we were to update this work now, we would again look at if there is a better pathway or a more likely pathway that is going to be met, and then maybe we would integrate that into the projections. And again, there's over 40 different parameters that you can look at in the climate tool. And so we didn't generate too much information all at once. We reached out to different operational branches of Mosaic and solicited feedback on which parameters the different operational branches would find the most useful to the work they do every day. And again, just to give everyone a quick overview of the types of information that we can get from the PCIC Climate Explorer. Once you've input your spatial polygons, selected your model, selected your emission scenario, and your variable of interest, you can get things like this annual cycle graph, which shows yearly, seasonal, and monthly mean values of a given variable. And for this one, it happens to be precipitation. You can kind of see right under the title types of information there. You can see the model, the emission scenario, the precipitation. And again, that, for example, this data is just going to be for that northern area of Vancouver Island. You can get a long-term average graph, which is just showing how your average daily precipitation, so your annual precipitation divided by 365, what the average of your different time periods is going to be doing as you move forward in time relative to your baseline period. This is a model context graph. This isn't something that we were able to do given the limitations of this study, but would be great to do in future projection work with Mosaic, where it takes the values from the model that you've chosen, which you can see in orange in our example here, and you can plot it against all of the parameters that are generated by other models. Then you can see where they agree, where they disagree, and in this way you can generate some confidence about the results that you're looking at. For example, here we can see that the CAN ESM2 does a pretty good job in projecting what future precipitation might be doing, insofar as it's well within the ranges that are projected by the other models as well. This is perhaps what I think is one of the most useful graphs that are generated by this particular tool. It's our change from baseline graph, which actually has two important graphs in one. We have our annual cycle graph, which shows the absolute daily average values. That's the line graph that you can see there. And then we also have the percent change graph, which shows how each month is likely to increase in percentage or decrease in percentage, again, relative to the 1980 to 2010 baseline period here. So we can see broadly, if we're looking at this graph, that we can expect a slight intensification of the water cycle here on Vancouver Island, meaning that we're going to see increases in precipitation during the wet periods, October, November, December, January, and we're going to see decreases in precipitation during the driest periods of the year, that June, July, and August summer period. And all of this data can be generated in tabular form. You can get the raw numbers, and it can also be distributed in spatial format, which is really nice. So we can see on the top, we're looking at a 1981 to 2010 baseline, moving forward into 2010, 2039, and then 2040 and 2069. And we can see that the purple is drier, the reds and oranges are wetter conditions, and we can see that in the summertime, there really is going to be a loss of the wetter days and an increase in the driest days. Alternatively, on the bottom, we can look at trends in the wintertime, and we're going to see increases, especially on that wet west coast of the island, and the amount of wet days. So again, just that intensification of the hydrologic cycle. We could look at our precipitation as snow here. And again, the middle of Vancouver Island has higher elevations, mountainous areas, mountainous peaks, and we're going to see that we're going to lose a lot of snow and ice in the lower lying coastal areas, and it's really only going to be confined to the higher elevation parts of Vancouver Island as we move forward in time. These are sort of regional projection snapshots that we put together. We try to tailor information to be as locally relevant as possible, and these are things that are given out to people that are, for example, working in the Central Island, because this is all pertinent climate change information for that Central Island portion of Vancouver Island. Any contractors that might work in this area as well are going to be supplied with this type of information, so they could hopefully have relatively quick and digestible ways to consider what climate change might be, or how climate change might be manifesting itself in the areas of Vancouver Island that they're working on. These are seasonal climate memos that have both climate and weather information with key messages for operating at that time of year, as well as the most up-to-date daily and seasonal forecast and fire information. And again, these are sent out to all employees and contractors each time we transition into a new season here on Vancouver Island. These, as well as the available data from the projection work, are meant to inform the professionals who manage very specific areas with very unique weather and climate realities. And it's also our hope that this type of thing encourages different people to engage more broadly with climate science and to consider the realities of climate science. So when considering all of the different adaptation and mitigation strategies that are being employed by Mosaic in hopes of becoming more climate resilient, it's important to note that many of the things in this list, the things that we've kind of talked about, have been in consideration or even under development before the model projection project began. But a consistent message that I've heard from different operational branches is that this modeling work that we did has given folks an increased sense of confidence in their decision making to go ahead with different projects. There's been a consistent relaying of a comfort in knowing they now have the science and data to support their decisions and actions. And they're, an empowerment to say, this is happening, and therefore we need to do this, or we need to keep planning on how we can best adapt and mitigate what is likely to occur. Things that we've been thinking can occur that now we really feel confident in beginning to address. So being a coastal temperate rainforest, Mosaic previously didn't think too much about fire being a large constraint on their operations, but that has absolutely changed, and the modeling has supported this view. Mosaic is currently undertaking thinning and further analyses of wind-related processes to help with forest fire resilience. This is also accompanying hazard abatement strategies such as prescribed burning and collaborations with the Wildfire Service. Orchards are being adjusted to grow a different species of cedar with hopes of improving their climate resilience. And these are going to be species that are better adapted to warmer and drier climates. There's also considerable work being done on trying to best plan for changes that are going to be made to culvert sizes, to bridge infrastructure, landslide and flood planning, all with the expectation that these things are going to be more frequent and more intense moving forward. And some consistent feedback is that while these things have always been perhaps discussed and talked about in the past, some of the recent weather realities that we've experienced here in British Columbia and especially on Vancouver Island in these last couple of years has really driven home the imminent threat and reality of it, and the results of these different climate projections, weather analyses have just further driven home that urgency. So I would say that for sure these climate projections have contributed to some novel projects on Mosaic's land base, but I think this is a company that was already committed to considerable climate resilience work, mitigation and adaptation work, and I think that the results of the climate projections has just enhanced the certainty and confidence with which they're undertaking work to better prepare the company and its operations to climate risks and weather risks in the future. And again, this is just an example of a log sort facility. And at first, when I was taking the results of our climate modeling to different operational areas in the country, or sorry, in the company, I did 3 tailored presentations to South Island folks, to Central Island folks, and North Island folks. I wasn't necessarily sure how the information would be received, if people would be receptive to it, if people would be relatively different to it. But basically, over and over again, I would finish my presentation and people would say, yep, this is all great. Thanks for this information. And by the way, here's an issue that we've been facing for the last 5-10 years. Here are 3 or 4 different solutions that we've been brainstorming. What do you think? What do you think is the best way to proceed? Which was very interesting, cool, and surprising for me to see that, yeah, this is obviously a company filled with people who have been thinking hard about climate and weather for a long time. So I think all of this modeling projection work fit very well into how people were already thinking about weather and climate here at Mosaic. Some emerging initiatives that are ongoing and will be continued to be worked on moving forward. The integration of third-party technology for just better relaying all of the different weather and climate information that we have to people that are working on the land, better dashboard and alert systems. So people who are working in one specific area of Vancouver Island can immediately see all of the relevant weather alert information to them, so they know if there's anything dangerous. They'll have better warning if there are any shutdown conditions, so they don't have to waste their time going out there only to find out that actually it's going to be too wet to work that day or what have you. We're going to be writing more climate memos that detail best practices with respect to how we can integrate climate projections into planning for better climate resilience. We're always trying to improve our downscaling techniques, sensitivities, and data, trying to get as good a spatial resolution as we can, seeing if we can improve anyway on that 10-kilometer squared resolution. We're planning improvements to the weather station network, and we want to, in addition to having stations that are recording and generating daily weather information, we want to have long-term, high-quality stations that are permanent, that will serve as climate reference stations as well, not just daily weather. We're integrating data generated in these climate projections into ongoing watershed assessment projects. So not just looking in the immediate future for how different projects are going to impact watersheds, but also in the context of how climate change is going to be an overlapping stressor as well. And then also looking at emerging tools out of PKIC, like the Design Value Explorer, which allows us to examine projected future change with respect to design variables. So these are things that are crucial to buildings, roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. And I think that is about my last slide. So yeah, I'll probably end it here, but I'll leave this slide up as just yeah, a guide with some of the things that are ongoing, and happy to have a chat or answer some questions if there are any.
Thanks, Ben. That's fantastic. So interesting. And I really like the connection between the more scientific, technical side and how that was connected to the practical applications in the company. It's really, really fantastic. You don't see that often in a private company setting. So now we have some time for questions. We would love to open it up to the participants here, members. So I see David, you'd like to, oh, no, David just applauded. Yeah, so let's do this a similar approach to the meet and greet. So if you do have a question or even just a comment, you're welcome to use the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I'll let you unmute your microphone. Anybody like to start us off? Ingrid, excellent. Go ahead, Ingrid.
Hi, hi Ben. Yeah, great presentation. Really appreciated it. Sort of took me back to when I was working deep in climate data. I am super curious, like in terms of the modeling, appreciate sort of the evolution of climate scenarios and so on. But I mean, with RCP 4.5 and the fact that we haven't yet bent the curve. Like I was just looking at IEA greenhouse gas emissions for 2023, and it's still going up. So I'm just sort of curious how sort of how you're adjusting in the communication around sort of the modeling work and sort of what we know reality is in terms of increasing greenhouse gas emissions, and yeah, just very on a practical level, how that's being factored in.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ingrid, and I mean, probably one of the most important questions as far as communicating results like this to a broader audience. And I think, and at the end, let me know if I actually answered your question here. But I think the way that we think about it at Mosaic, starting off with that middle emission scenario. And again, this was almost a proof of concept approach for myself, for Mosaic in general, because we hadn't really done something like this before. So we didn't want to take on too much complexity in this first run through, where I think if we were to go through it again, we would certainly try to incorporate more than one scenario. We would want to look at that middle emission scenario. We would also want to look at that high emission scenario, and then you can really start to hone in on probability and the most likely manifestation of how climate is going to unfold in the future. So I think the way that we look at this at Mosaic is we ran these projections with that middle climate scenario. Realistically, at this point, we probably have good enough information to suggest, like you were saying, this is probably the best case scenario climate-wise moving forward for what we could be dealing with 30 years from now, 50 years from now. And there's also a chance that it could be, for lack of a better term, worse. So any planning that we're doing and any activities that we're undertaking as a company or operationally, know that the projections we have are probably now a best case scenario. And if there's any debate on if, let's say, whatever, a culvert should be expanded to a certain size, it might be a good idea to go with a larger size, reflecting greater floods, because like you said, perhaps in the end we do end up inching closer towards that that high emission scenario. So yeah, does that kind of answer your question? Or
yeah, more or less. And I have a couple of other questions, but I'll hang back because I'm sure there's other folks here who've got questions, so I'll just wait for a bit.
Okay, sounds good. And I also noticed too that I have a colleague that I think has joined us as well, and Molly, feel free to join in if you have anything to add to any of this, but otherwise happy to keep answering.
Thanks, Ben. And sorry I was late. The Zoom caused me some issues, but I caught most of it.
Hey, no problem.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Molly. Thanks for joining us. Okay, anybody else have any questions for Ben?
If I can, just while people are thinking of their questions, I might just add on to Ben's answer to Ingrid's question there, because of course Ben is our technical expert and runs these models. And then it comes to our larger kind of climate solutions team to talk about how we communicate them. So to your point around, we picked 4.5 at one point, on the day as our first cut at this. But we might do something a little bit differently now. But when we think about it in a communications way, most of the communicating we're doing around this, is to people, so certainly to forest professionals who are making land management, silviculture, crossing design decisions, but a lot of the work that we're trying to do is communicate this to our kind of operational folks, the people who run logging companies and our machine operators, and they run a tree planting company, or, there's thousands of people that work on our land that, prior to, the last few years with some of the initiatives Ben talked about, we didn't talk to them about climate change really and what it means for a landowner to incorporate it into our decision making. So the difference between a mid scenario and a high scenario is too fine of a detail for those kinds of communications, right? We're in the baby steps place of talking to a contractor community but made up of, forestry, harvesting, road building, tree planting, silviculture activities, workers who, need to hear from us to start, that we're thinking about it, that we're adjusting to it, and that if we don't make adjustments, things are going to get immeasurably worse. And, our efforts are just to, hold us at the increases that we're seeing today, never mind actually bend the curve, right? So it becomes more of a culture question, right? Like, what can you give to people that's going to be digestible and motivate them to participate in what we're asking them to participate in? So that's a very long-winded answer, but it's something that I think about a lot in terms of, as we communicate Ben's work to a broad contractor community, how much detail do we give? What are the take-home messages? How can we involve those folks and have them feel like we're doing the good work and that there's space for them to be involved or have input? So yeah, it won't surprise you that I don't talk about RCP 4.5 when we have those big sessions, right? It's just too much detail. That's more for our kind of internal group that Ben supports us on.
Yeah,
but
totally
I think
understand.
communication is so important here, and I think a lot about what the right level of communication looks like.
Yeah, no, thanks for that very practical, on the ground perspective. And I think I was actually more interested from the standpoint of, what's being communicated at the highest levels in terms of risk management, in the boardrooms.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fair. What's being communicated at that level is, that we're doing this work. The risk level in my time in that room has been elevated almost every time we've reviewed it as an organization. And that reality check is good because it supports us continuing to do the practical work at the level that Ben and I, spend most of our time at. But it's very much front of mind for those folks. And the risk mitigation part of it is, we point to the initiatives Ben has on the screen and the work that we've been doing together for the past 4 or 5 years.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid.
I have a question.
Great.
Sorry, I can't find my hand function. So
This is Jennifer.
yeah, it's Jennifer.
Perfect. Go ahead.
I just had a question. If Mosaic is putting in larger crossings, is this surpassing the FPPR requirements for the peak flows? And is the government looking at changing those requirements based on any of this information?
You might be getting just a wee bit technical on the crossing sides for us, for Ben and I, Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
But you know, what our engineers, generally third-party engineers who will do our crossing designs, what they've been incorporating more recently is kind of a climate change you know, precautionary factor. So they'll do their work according to the accepted, you know, legislation and professional guidelines, and then they'll add 20%, for example. So that is some of the things that we've seen our kind of third-party engineers do when doing kind of significant crossing design for us, is add a climate change factor like that. And to your question around government, I can't speak to that. I wouldn't know.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, like in the past, there used to be sort of 100mm shutdown criteria. So is that policy still in place, or was that company specific?
Yep, so we do have what we call the rainfall shutdown standard. It is specific to region, depending on, you know, underlying conditions like geological conditions. But you know, the rule of thumb of 100mm over 24 hours is a, you know, good kind of baseline, plus or minus, for specific kind of local conditions. And a lot of the work that Ben does on the weather station informs a lot of that. So Ben, I don't know if you want to chime in about how your work helps us monitor that.
Yeah, we David Blesney and I, we have a lot of goals as far as better integrating forecast data, for example, that will generate probabilities of when shutdowns might occur and things like that. But again, I don't know if that's actually addressing the question. I just kind of reiterate what Molly said, that yeah, it seems like the 100mm shutdown is still something widely applied by Mosaic.
Yeah,
I was just thinking, like, maybe this information might change that practice.
Well, the shutdown guidelines or the standard has a couple of reasons why we would implement it. One is the environmental piece, right? Just the soil sensitivity at those higher rainfall levels. It's not environmentally appropriate to be working out there, but it's also a safety issue. So the risk of landslides increases significantly once you get over those thresholds. And so having workers go out in those conditions is a safety issue. So, certainly the climate work might help us forecast how many of those days we might have a year, right? Because of course, in our planning work, we would say, we anticipate we're going to be shut down for fire 4 weeks this year, and we'll lose, 10 working days to rainfall shutdown or similar conditions. And, the climate modeling might help us say in the next 10 years, those rainfall shutdown days might increase to 15 days a year. And so we would incorporate that into our expectations for our annual plan. So that's where I can see some of the, climate modeling helping us plan our kind of annual expectations. But on the day-to-day basis, the rule is you're, at 3 a.m. you'd check the weather stations, and if that threshold has been exceeded, you don't go out, because the whole point is to keep people out of the woods on those days. If that answers your question, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Thanks. Ingrid, did you want to finish us off with your additional questions?
Sure. Yeah, I guess, just thinking big picture here, and just also a little bit from a policy perspective, like, are there ways in which the province, Ministry of Forests can support, what you're doing around the climate data modeling and sort of the I say the adaptation type initiatives that come out of that. And, you know, I'm thinking like specifically things like the new Future Forest Ecosystem Center. Like, are there connections being made between like the work you're doing and, you know, that center? Like, I'm just very curious about that.
I'm actually not super familiar with that center, Ingrid. That doesn't mean that some of our folks don't know them and work with them, but you know, to your bigger question, you know, there is good work already happening with, you know, various branches of the ministry. I think a great example is on the tree improvement side. Ben talked about, you know, improving the drought resiliency of cedar and some of the other, you know, tools that the provincial government has put forward on seed use and assisted migration and other kind of research trials to help us on the kind of tree improvement and silviculture side. So I think that there's really good work happening there that we're very tied into. So I think a great collaborative example of you know, the kind of modeling work getting down to the ground level through the chief forester's recommendations. You know, some of the things that we're going to look forward to, particularly on my mind, is, you know, how we can incorporate climate change into timber supply modeling in a appropriate and verifiable and defensible manner. You know, I know that there is a national kind of collaboration going on, I think led by the Canadian Forest Service, on how to incorporate, you know, I think they're calling it climate adjusted timber supply modeling. And so, you know, that's something that we get questions about a lot. You know, we're a private landowner, and so our timber supply modeling is independent of government. But of course, from a best practice perspective and from an asset management perspective, we would like our timber supply modeling to be climate adjusted so that we're, you know, thinking about those long time horizons from a forest management perspective. So those are some of the things that I think are, you know, that in particular is in its infancy, as I understand it, and we'll look forward to when the Canadian Forest Service and, you know, the others involved in that, you know, are looking for kind of partners from the private sector to look at how we might incorporate that into our business.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. There's a good discussion paper put out last year on that, the TSR review. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And from my perspective, Ingrid, as far as the government making more commitments to facilitating this work is just continued investment into better and better climate modeling. And I should mention that PKIC, for example, is partially funded by the BC government. So better downscaling, more data, always good.
Excellent. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to thank Ben so much for his presentation, and Molly there for your help with the Q&A, and thanks to everyone for your really great questions. So sorry if you can hear my toddler in the background. Okay, so now we're going to I'm going to share my screen again.
So before you do, Suzanne, one thing I should mention is I do have to run. I have to go teach a class. But I'm worried that if I leave, it might end the recording.
Right.
So if that happens, I'll send you the recording if it ends up on my computer, and then maybe you'll be the official host at that point, and you can start another recording if that makes sense.
Good. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Ben.
No problem. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.